Kingsley Plantation was established by Zephaniah Kingsley in 1814. Arriving to Florida in 1803, Kingsley purchased many plantations in North Florida from British citizens evacuating the state. Kingsley was a wealthy planter who was married to Anna, a former slave from West Africa who he purchased in 1806 and freed along with their children in 1811. Anna actively participated in the management of Kingsley's plantation and eventually was able to legally claim Kingsley's inheritance, even though she was a black woman and it was against the law for her to own land at that time. The plantation is located on Fort George Island, a barrier island that is surrounded by tidal estuaries. The plantation grew many cash crops, including corn, citrus, and sugarcane, but the chief products were indigo and Sea Island cotton. Sea Island cotton was highly cultivated and was a particularly lucrative cash crop. For slaves, the bulk of the North Florida climate was just as it is today, hot, humid, and difficult to work in. Kingsley Plantation operated on the Spanish-style task system. This system meant that slaves, or a group of slaves, were assigned a particular set of tasks to accomplish for the day. When the tasks were accomplished, the slaves would retire for the day and could spend time with their families or cultivate their personal crops. This practice was in stark contrast to the antebellum method of slavery practiced elsewhere in the South. This system, which is more closely associated with the British, was a work-based system. Slaves worked as long as their masters saw fit and were not released for the day once their tasks were completed. Kingsley Plantation is unique partly because of its construction. Zephaniah's wife, Anna, was one of his slaves from West Africa. Her cultural influence can be seen in the semicircle construction of the slaves' living quarters. The coquina shelters are arranged in an almost crescent moon shape, which is similar to the structure of the village that Anna lived in prior to her enslavement. Another unique aspect of Anna's influence on Kingsley Plantation is something that's actually not visible to the eye. Traditionally, slaves were buried separately from the white family on the plantation. This tradition is observed in Kingsley Plantation. However, the method of burial for the slaves is unique. Slaves were buried in a circular pattern under a tree, another aspect borrowed from Anna Kingsley's cultural origins. The burial site is not honored with a plaque, not marked with a historical marker, and is actually a part of the driveway leading up to the plantation house. As discussed in the packet, Zephaniah Kingsley could be considered an unusual slave owner for his time period. He encouraged the rights of a slave to marry, to own and inherit property, and to submit a testimony in court. Kingsley was clearly influenced by the Spanish and supported their policy to provide slaves with what they believed to be liberal provisions. His colleagues did not heed his recommendations, and Florida policies began to become even more limiting for slaves. Fearing the rising of dangerous racial tensions, Kingsley relocated his family to Haiti in 1837 and shortly after sold his North Florida plantation to his nephews. So, why does Kingsley Plantation matter to Florida history? Out of the multiple plantations in North Florida, what sets Kingsley Plantation apart? For one, Kingsley Plantation, although impressive, was not constructed with the grandeur that is historically associated with the antebellum South. The plantation home is relatively modest, void of sprawling architecture and regal columns. The slave quarters were sturdy, but not elaborate, and constructed approximately 200 to 300 yards from the main house. Secondly, Anna's influence is just as evident in the construction of the plantation as her husband's. The architecture is congruent with her West African culture, and slaves were allowed to keep their given African names instead of the more traditionally Anglican names that would be assigned to them at plantations. Anna helped to manage the plantation and even had slaves of her own. Her prevalent presence in Kingsley Plantation's history exemplifies two often overlooked historical truths. Number one, it was not unheard of for slave owners to marry their slaves, and two, it was not an uncommon practice for former slaves to eventually become slave owners themselves. Most importantly, however, was the way that Zephaniah Kingsley maintained his plantation. He implemented the task system, which allowed for his slaves to have time to tend to their personal needs and spend time with their own families. They were able to cultivate crops and sometimes able to sell them or to trade them back with Kingsley. Kingsley believed in the societal importance of free blacks and became increasingly frustrated when Florida's legislation did not keep up with his ideas. Kingsley Plantation was profitable, but in Kingsley's mind, not worth the safety of his family.